Hey, ¿qué es la que hay, mi gente? It's Rocky here from SpeakSpanishFaster.com. And in today's video, we are going to talk a little bit more about Puerto Rican Spanish. This is one of the most popular requests I get on this channel in the comments. It seems like you guys always want some more tips and tricks or strategies to learn Puerto Rican Spanish and to speak Puerto Rican Spanish. So in today's video, I want to cover a few of the important aspects, I would say, of Puerto Rican Spanish so that you can improve, all right? Because once you know these, I would say, three things that I'm going to share with you, when you're listening to Puerto Rican Spanish, you'll notice them, you'll be aware of them, it'll stand out to you, and it will make it easier to replicate, all right? So the first thing is something that we all know in Puerto Rican Spanish. The first key that you need to know is that many people, not everybody, but many people change the R's for the L's, okay? So a classic example of this is instead of saying hablar, we say hablar. Instead of saying puerta, we say puerta. Okay, so that's the example. Instead of por, we say pol. Pol. Now, the reason I say not everybody does this, because whenever I say this, give this example, some Puerto Ricans will comment like, oh, not all Puerto Ricans talk like this. Don't say we all talk like this. I'm not saying everybody talks like this. There are some Puerto Ricans that might pronounce their R's and might speak more neutral, but the majority of people, if we look at the basic Pareto's 80-20, I would say 80% of the people that you're going to come into contact with if you ever go to Puerto Rico, or if you're speaking to Puerto Ricans outside of the country, are going to do this. Okay, maybe not for every single word and every single R, but you will hear the L being used. Pol, hablar, puerta, things like that. But it's not as noticeable because when they're speaking fast, like if I say, mira, yo te quiero hablar. Like if I say it really fast, then it's not as noticeable. So it's not something that just really stands out. Abre la puerta versus abre la puerta. It's a slight variation. So don't get too carried away here and say puerta. You know, that's a mistake I see some people make when they try to mimic a Puerto Rican, or they want to talk like a Puerto Rican. They do it too hard of an L. It's a slight L. Hablar, hablar, instead of hablar, or hablar, hablar. So it's very slight, but you will hear many Puerto Ricans using it. And this isn't just a characteristic of Puerto Rican Spanish, but Caribbean Spanish in general, Dominican Spanish, and also Cuban Spanish, at least some parts of those countries. So again, I'm not saying all Dominicans do this, and I'm not saying all Cubans do this. And of course, not all Puerto Ricans do this. But it is a characteristic of Puerto Rican Spanish that you're not going to hear in Spanish from Mexico or Spain or Colombia or Argentina or anywhere else in the world. You're only going to hear this L instead of the R in Caribbean Spanish. Okay, so that's the first tip or key to remember. And I know some of you know this already, but I've never really touched on the idea that it's a slight L. It's not really a hard L. So that's one extra or new tip that can help you out. Now, the next thing, of course, is the S, or the aspiration of the S, the elimination of the S. So instead of como estás, you'll hear como está, como está, como tú estás. But we're still talking to you. It's not the usted form. We're still using the you form. All right? So I think a mistake people make with the S when they're trying to speak it in the way that Puerto Ricans use it is that even though we eliminate the S, there's still like a little sound there. And you might not hear that sound in like Dominican and Cuban Spanish. And this is where Puerto Rican is a little unique Spanish, is that like in Dominican Spanish, you might hear como tú ta, como tú ta. So they just completely cut the S. Como está, está. So it's like está. But in Puerto Rican Spanish, it's like como está, está. Instead of, so like las mujeres, la mujere is where you might hear Dominican Spanish might be la mujere. In Puerto Rican Spanish, it's more like la mujere. So it's kind of like a little instead of the S. So I think that's a unique characteristic. You might hear that in Cuban Spanish. I'm not as familiar with Cuban Spanish as I am with Dominican or Puerto Rican Spanish. But so if you're Cuban, maybe you can comment below and let me know if it's more similar to kind of DR, where they just completely cut the S, versus Puerto Rican Spanish, where they cut the S, but there's kind of a little sound. It's like a slight H, you could say, like a slight English H that would go there. La mujere. So notice it's not la mujere, it's la mujere. Como está, instead of como está. All right, so that's the key with Puerto Rican Spanish, but a lot of times the S's will disappear. And that's common not only for Caribbean Spanish. A lot of people think this is just a characteristic of Caribbean Spanish, but there's a lot of other countries, Central America, South America, that you will hear people omit the S as well. Even in Spain, there are places in Spain where you will hear the S being omitted. I think it's just because it helps us speak faster. So you'll see a lot of words being cut and things like that. The S is being cut. And I would say it's more common in Caribbean Spanish because we speak very quickly. But other countries, it's still very common to hear no S or the chopping up of words. And a lot of people say, well, don't Puerto Ricans put words together? That is true, but everybody does it. Like when Spanish people start talking fast, that's a characteristic of all Spanish, is we all put words together just so we can speak faster. And it's kind of the same thing in English also. Instead of, hey, what's up? Hey, what's up? So, what's up? Hey, what's up? What's up? So, we do the same thing in all languages so that we can speak faster and so it flows better. Now, another aspect of Puerto Rican Spanish is getting rid of the D in between vowels, and you'll usually see this at the end of words. So instead of hablado, hablao, cuidado, cuidao, dedo, deo, dedo, deo, decidido, decidio, decidio. So you might, the D in between a vowel at the end of a word will just completely evaporate, and you'll get this ow sound or eo sound or eo sound. That's very common in Puerto Rican Spanish, very common in Caribbean Spanish in general as well, is getting rid of that D at the end. You'll hear that in Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and Cuba as well. So, cuidado, pegao, hablao, things like that you'll definitely hear in all of those countries. And when you hear that ow sound, it's simply because a lot of people say, what pegao, cuidado, anytime you hear that ow sound, it's usually the D is gone and it's the two vowels. That's the sound they make. So a common dish in Puerto Rico to eat is pollo guisado, but we say pollo guisado. All right, so that should help a lot of you if you're having some trouble. Like, what is the guisado? Ow, I don't get that. Well, now you should get it. So basically, all the characteristics I share with you today, minus a few variations, are common amongst all Caribbean Spanish, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and Cuban Spanish. What really makes these Spanishes different from each other is a mixture of that pronunciation with the intonation. So intonation is key. In fact, intonation and pronunciation is what makes any Spanish or any language its own variation, is the way people pronounce the words and how the flow of those words, and also the words that they use, because in Puerto Rico we use different words than in DR and Cuba. I'm sure there's different variations. We use a lot of the same words, and we all use basic Spanish words, but there are some words that you'll strictly hear in Puerto Rico, some that you'll strictly hear in DR, some you'll strictly hear in Cuba, and some you'll hear strictly the Caribbean versus other places like guagua for bus or truck. You'll hear that in Puerto Rico, DR, and I'm pretty sure Cuba as well. But there are some words specifically in Puerto Rico that you won't hear as much or really any in DR and Cuba and vice versa. So the key, again, the big differentiator between these three is the actual intonation. So let me think of a sentence that I can talk more of like a Puerto Rican accent. So, and if you just watch some of my other videos, I have more of a Puerto Rican accent. I have a Puerto Rican accent when I speak, more like a New Yorican accent, but whatever. You get it. But let me think of a quick sentence I can say that sounds, and I'm gonna do it in as authentic of a Puerto Rican accent as I can do. Remember, I'm a Puerto Rican from the States, not straight from Puerto Rico, so Puerto Ricans, don't be too hard on me here. Mira, ayer yo estaba hablando con mi primo y él me estaba diciendo de las cosas que estaban pasando en la isla después del huracán. Y también me dijo que supuestamente hay parte de su casa que fueron destruidas por la tormenta y ahora tiene que arreglarla. So be aware of that specific intonation. In Dominican intonation, Cuban intonation sounds different. So that's how you can tell the difference between a Puerto Rican and a Dominican, even though we use a lot of the same characteristics, a lot of the same words, a lot of parts of our Spanish are very similar. But when you hear a Dominican speak versus a Puerto Rican speak, you can tell the difference between the two because of the flow, the style of the way that we speak. So pay attention to the intonation. Listen to much more Puerto Rican Spanish. Listen to the way that they say the words, how they pronounce certain letters. That will really help you dial in your Puerto Rican Spanish. Like, for example, a lot of times Puerto Ricans, you'll hear them say yo instead of yo. So some Spanish-speaking countries, they say yo with the yo for the Y. A lot of Puerto Ricans, maybe not all of them, but many of them will say yo, yo, yo. It's like a J sound. So that's just a little quick recap update on some Puerto Rican Spanish. I know you guys love the Puerto Rican Spanish videos. I'm going to try to get my cousin Kevin and my friend Hector back on some videos, but they've been pretty busy with the hurricane in Puerto Rico. So just please send your prayers and your blessings to them as they continue to try to recover from any damage that was done on their houses, their communities. It hasn't been easy, but they're used to it. This happens almost seems like yearly. It's starting to happen in Puerto Rico. So, but once they get back on their feet and everything is good, I'll try to get them for some more videos, and maybe I'll even take a trip out there. But if you found this video helpful and you're looking to really improve your Spanish, then I highly recommend you click the link in the comments, speakspanishfaster.com/YouTube. That's going to take you to our training where I'm going to show you my 3 biggest secrets to learn Spanish faster. If you enjoyed the video, do me a big favor, hit the thumbs up for me, comment below, let me know what else you need help with. Last but not least, please do not forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you never miss another video. Hasta la próxima vez. Hablamos.